Hi, everyone. I'm Paige. I lead the community at the Nature Tech Collective, and we're a community of practitioners across the field of nature tech. So, MRV providers, investors, a few project developers, but also academics, all sorts of stakeholders that are interested in collaborating together and growing and maturing the nature tech field. Um, so just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone's on mute for now. We're going to open up your sounds, your microphones at the Q&A section of this webinar. And that'll be at about, minute 40, essentially. So we've got about 30 to 40 minutes of Q&A. The chat is already live, obviously. So please introduce yourselves and your organizations, but also if you have any questions about what we say, or that you're already ready for in the Q&A, just drop them also in the chat. Yeah, just drop questions in as they come up. Yeah, and again, take a moment to rename yourself to your name and organization, just so we can know who's in the room, who's asking questions, and, valuable for networking in general. So this event is kind of the Nature Tech in Action series is a series of case studies where we showcase our members' work with particular partners and particular geographies. We're trying to get really precise about nature tech in action in general because this sector needs to move faster, and it does move faster. Sorry, if we're sharing knowledge, if we're sharing what's happening in the field. We're not here to compete with each other. We're here to collaborate in general, to be rigorous, collaborative, also very useful to the natural world. So that means sharing generously. It also means being honest about what worked, what didn't. It means asking really hard questions in the spirit of curiosity rather than criticism. And it means connecting with each other to resources, to people, to ideas, whenever you can. So please, again, use this opportunity, use this space to connect in all of the ways. Use the chat, ask some questions. Now, why we're here today specifically and what we're going to talk about. Sustainable aviation fuel. Sustainable aviation fuel has become one of the most high-profile climate transition stories in the corporate world, at least. Airlines have targets, regulators have mandates, investors are also paying attention, and the carbon argument in general for sustainable aviation fuels is being pretty well understood. What's less well understood, obviously, is what happens when you start asking where the fuel actually comes from. And sustainable aviation fuel is only as sustainable as the land it's grown on. And the moment you start pulling on that thread, the feedstocks, the land use, the ecosystems that are converted or conserved in the process, you're no longer in a carbon story only, you're in a nature story, which is the case for pretty much everything we touch in this world. So today we're going to look at what it actually takes to assess nature risk at the feedstock level in practice in the field on specific sites in Malaysian Borneo. So what data do you need? What frameworks exist? How precise can remote sensing actually be? Where does it have limits? What does this mean for the wider sector? To walk us through all of this, I'm joined by Marcus from Gentian. You're going to talk us through who you are, what your company does, and you're going to be explaining to us much more this case study that came out of a collaboration with Raw Energy and LanzaJet as part of the Nature Positive Initiative State of Nature Metrics pilot, which is also another aspect to what we're going to be discussing today. So Marcus, welcome. We're getting into it. Thank you so much for being here today. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and of course, Gentian, what do you do there?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Paige. Yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so just to quickly say a little bit about myself. Yeah, so I'm Marcus. I'm the CTO at Gentian. My background is in engineering, but then I also have a PhD, which is focused on remote sensing and ecology. So the work that I do at Gentian is really sitting in the center of using satellite data and combining this with machine learning, AI, the technology that's really on everyone's mind these days, and applying this towards creating nature data. And that's what we do at Gentian. So At Gentian, we are a nature data provider. And the use cases that we provide that nature for is for nature compliance, as well as nature risk and reporting. So I'll focus today mostly on that nature risk and reporting aspect. That's what we're talking about, especially with regards to the State of Nature metrics, the Nature Positive Initiative, and what we've done with sustainable aviation fuels. But what's shared between data for nature compliance or data for nature risk and reporting is that the fundamental data that we have to understand is about habitat or about habitat mapping. So that's what we do at Gentian. We do habitat mapping, and this is because habitat, so the vegetation and the community that it forms, this is really at the center of biodiversity, what supports it. So what we do is we map habitat using a combination of very high resolution imagery and using our AI. And that's really one of the things that clearly sets us apart from other organizations trying to do similar things, is the very high resolution nature of the data that we're using. There's quite a few other players that are using 10-meter data. And while there are many use cases that 10-meter data is good for, where we really sit is trying to understand things at the site level. So the actual space where a company has that impact on the site itself. So I'm looking forward to talking more about how our data actually gives insights at the site level to truly reveal the impact that organizations are actually having on nature.
Thanks, Marcus. That's a perfect introduction. And maybe to get just a tiny bit deeper on that, actually, when you think about the kinds of organizations that are coming to you, what are they really trying to figure out? What's the question that they can't answer without this very high resolution data?
Yeah, great. And for here, so there is the nature compliance use case, which, yeah, you can think of maybe if you typically would have to send an ecologist to the field to take a survey before constructing. That is one use case, and that's where our data can help. But I'll focus mainly for now on the nature risk and reporting, and why companies are interested in nature risk and reporting and how our data serves them. So basically, any organization that has an impact on land, so we could call these, let's say, global land developers. You could think these could be organizations, I guess something that's also very much on people's minds is organizations that are trying to expand and build data centers. To do this, they're going to have to convert land. They're going to have to convert nature. So these kinds of organizations have a real need for our data because they have to understand the impact that that land conversion is going to have. So if you're, let's say, building a data center, you want to, before you acquire that land, you want to make sure that you're not going to be converting land that has a protected habitat on it or a protected species that's going to prevent you, that's going to cause you a headache in the future, or that's going to damage your reputation because you've converted an old growth forest, and that's going to damage the opinions of people that are looking at your work. So that's on the nature risk side. You need organizations before they've even acquired sites, while they're looking, they need to be able to understand what is the risk, what is the impact that we might have that we need to be aware of before we go and start developing that site. And then on the reporting side, a lot of it is about evidence. So there's increasing demands for companies to be disclosing their impact on nature.
Mm.
And as much as companies would like to do this, or even if companies say, we did all the checks, we have had no impact on nature here. The missing piece, of course, is evidence. That's what people want to see. That's what organizations, that's what investors, people that your stakeholders that you're beholden to, they want to see evidence. So that's where our data can come in as well, showing this very high resolution, granular, site level information that allows you to report precisely on the impact that you've actually had on nature. And the piece that we're adding, which we'll talk about more, is having some common shared frameworks for doing this reporting. So combining the data with a framework that's actually meaningful and understandable to the people that are reviewing it.
Mm. And you also had some examples of your high resolution imagery. I think maybe this was a good moment to bring it up.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. Let me just try to share my screen here. Great. Hopefully you can all see this. Um, one of the points that I like to emphasize is that when you're trying to do, looking at your nature risk or trying to report on nature, um, there are many habitat mapping services out there that you could already use. And the issue is not that there's no data. The issue is that the data that's out there isn't fit for purpose. So here what I'm showing is just an example of a site on the right-hand side. And I've just downloaded some of the leading providers of data in this space. So this is what you get from Google or the European Space Agency, or in England, we have some some data layers that are tailored to England, like what's provided by the government with Natural England. Um, and if you look at the right-hand image and what's on the left, it's tough to see the correspondence, right? You'd be a bit hard pressed to actually see, oh, where are those trees coming in? Where are those buildings? So while I don't want to, these layers on the left are hugely useful for many applications, but they're not useful at the site level. And that's really where Gentian, where we see our difference, is being able to look at the site level and give you the information you need to actually show evidence of impact. So if I go one slide forward here, this is the level of data that we're providing. So now you can actually see the buildings, you can actually see the different habitats, you can actually realize that there's actually a river on site that the other providers haven't been able to capture. So this is the difference in terms of using very high resolution imagery. It actually allows you to get to something meaningful with the impact that you're having and the risk that's there.
Wow, yeah, no, that is a difference. Thanks for showing us. And so to get to the case study, um, most people think of sustainable aviation fuel as a carbon story. We've established that. But can you help us contextualize what's missing in general from that framing and what you're seeing precisely with what you've worked on?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, sustainable aviation fuel, though, it's in the name, so it has to be sustainable somehow. And while the focus is especially on carbon, um, the question is, where does this fuel come from, right? And there's different sources that this fuel can come from. There's some waste products, there's sometimes it's a residual, but in some cases, and in a lot of cases, it actually requires growing something new to be able to generate that biomass that's needed uh, for that feedstock. Um, and if you just focus on it as a carbon problem, I think this is something that we've seen time and time again in environmental history, is that when you just focus on one problem, you often, in solving that problem, create another one. It's kind of like this whack-a-mole situation. And this is what we have to avoid when it comes to sustainable aviation fuels. So when we're actually thinking about sustainable feedstock, we need to be concerned with what habitat is being converted, um, what we might be losing, and showing, and this is where the risk element comes in. We want to avoid losing the most valuable habitat that we have in order to achieve this very important goal, which is decarbonizing aviation.
And so we mentioned your partners were LanzaJet and Raw Energy. Um, but so we'll introduce them. You can tell us that. But in general, in the sustainable aviation fuel ecosystem, um, who needs to answer this nature question in general? What's driving them to care?
Yeah, great. So I'll go through three different levels of organizations that are relevant here. So at the, let's call it at the bottom level, we have the feedstock providers themselves. So this would be Raw Energy in this case. So for example, Raw Energy, what they do is they grow a fast-growing hybrid tropical switchgrass. So they need to understand nature risk and impact because they're actually converting land to grow this. And maybe I'll just use this opportunity to shout out the work that Raw Energy does because they have some evidence of in converting to this hybrid tropical switchgrass, it actually has some beneficial properties for the soil as well in terms of restoring nutrients. It can be restorative as well. Um, so so it actually can have benefits as long as we're not deforesting old growth forest, which doesn't make sense at all if we're trying to be sustainable. Okay, so that's the first level, which is the organization that has the direct impact with their with, with the feedstock that they're creating. The next level is the sustainable aviation producer. So in this case, it would be LanzaJet. And I'd like to shout out that, yeah, I can see our close colleague, Daniel Block is on the call, who's a colleague from LanzaJet. And they're concerned that if they're producing sustainable aviation fuels, they need to be able to show evidence that their supply chain, that the feedstock producers, where they're able to get the feedstock from to convert to their sustainable aviation fuel, they want to be able to show that they're sustainable. So that's the second level, the actual SAF producer. And then there's this third level even, which are the influencers at the highest level. So this could be, for example, investors. So if somebody's investing in LanzaJet, what they want to do is they want to be able to invest in this brilliant technology that LanzaJet's creating. And at the same time, in return for that investment, maybe they have their own carbon neutral or even carbon negative goals. So in to achieve those carbon negative goals, they are able to claim the credits from the sustainable aviation from the sustainable aviation fuel. But they also want to ensure that that actually is sustainable. So they need evidence also that their investment is going towards something that's not damaging nature.
Right. Okay, so now then, with this wider context, kind of getting into this story in particular, yeah, who brought Gentian in? What was the brief? Where in the world were you working?
Great. Yeah, so we had been wanting to do some work with Daniel and LanzaJet, and the Nature Positive Initiative State of Nature metrics provided this opportunity. So the way that our consortium formed through Daniel's orchestration was there was LanzaJet, and then there was Raw Energy, which was the feedstock producer, and then there's Gentian, which is the data provider. So Raw Energy, they have some sites in Malaysian Borneo, and they're considering developing these or transitioning these into the hybrid tropical switchgrass. But they want to understand which within these larger areas that they have, which are the actual areas within that they can convert with the lowest impact on nature. And that's where they were trying to work together with us to understand where those areas might be while still fitting within this framework of the Nature Positive Initiative State of Nature metrics. So we kind of got into this already with a parallel objective in mind. So we from Gentian, we wanted to see what we could do with sustainable aviation fuels. With Raw, they wanted to see how this nature data could help them evidence the good work that they're doing. And for LanzaJet, they wanted to see how this work could evidence for their supply chain. And we already went in with that objective, and then we were met with this parallel objective, which is what the Nature Positive Initiative was trying to do. So just to give a very brief bit of background on that, the Nature Positive Initiative has created the state of nature metrics to try to achieve consensus on how to report on nature. So they've released this set of metrics, which has evolved over time. And we were a piloting consortium here. So the main thing that the Nature Positive Initiative was interested in was our feedback on how well these metrics were working. So as our consortium, we were trying to achieve our goals while also seeing how well that would fit in with the state of nature metrics and giving feedback to the Nature Positive Initiative.
So lots of moving parts, and the sites that you were working across also had very different conditions on the ground from our prep call, obviously. I know this. Can you describe what you were actually looking at in these different locations and why those differences mattered in different ways to different partners?
Yeah, so this is in Malaysian Borneo. It's several different sites. They range from being in the hundreds of hectares to being in the thousands of hectares, so quite a good range there. But these sites and Malaysian Borneo, there is some very valuable old growth, biodiverse tropical forest there. At the same time, and I'll show some things later, there are areas there that have already been converted to plantation, or there's some areas that are scrub or areas that have been deforested. And if we are going to use this very valuable, very fertile land for producing something like sustainable aviation fuels, it's important to do it in those places, the places that have already been converted, that are already plantation. So there will be some sites that Raw has that either they have acquired or they can easily acquire, where there will be this opportunity to take areas that are already, let's call it, degraded, and actually use those areas to achieve the feedstock that they're trying to produce.
Okay. Um, and then there was the whole question of deciding on the right framework for assessing what you found. Um, and then connecting that also to the the broader standards that the partner cared about. So yeah, can you help us explore that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I acknowledge that everything gets a little bit complicated because we're talking about different standards and different organizations, and um, but yeah, ultimately, so Raw, they were already interested in and looking at a framework called HCV-HCSA. So that's high conservation value, high carbon stock approach. And just to put it simply, that's a framework in tropical forest, and it's especially used in Southeast Asia, that combines understanding the environment with understanding local people. So it also has this local people component. Um, but it's using this framework to make sure, to ensure, or even to prevent organizations from developing land that they shouldn't be developing. Um, so this framework is something that Raw was already going down the path of and was already collecting data for and had already investigated a bit. And one of the main questions we had was, can we actually take this approach and can we use some of that for the state of nature metrics? And this is where things start to tie in quite nicely, especially with what Gentian's already doing in terms of providing habitat data. So the state of nature metrics, which try to give these metrics for assessing impact on nature, fundamentally, the main piece of information that is required for doing the state of nature metrics is a really good understanding of the habitats on site and impact or change on those habitats. So when it comes to the habitats, um, what we did was we took back to the HCV-HCSA the classification system from the HCV-HCSA, which is especially for assessing different types of forests. So it has different classes for intact forest, degraded forest, scrub, plantation forest, these kinds of classes. And we actually sought approval from the Nature Positive Initiative to see if this classification system would marry well with the most fundamental of their metrics, which is about ecosystem extent, or another way of saying the map of habitats.
Mhm.
And we found through the piloting effort that uh, it was a very good fit. So this is really where we started, is recognizing that what we need to do is we need to develop a really good map of habitat on these sites, and that's the starting point for the metric, for the state of nature metrics, and the starting point for the HCV HCSA, which Raw was already had an understanding of and was already pursuing.
And I think for this question, you also have a few slides, but how did Gentian's remote sensing data fit into all of this, or what were you able to show? And
Yeah,
maybe
great.
where were the limits?
Yeah, great. Yeah, maybe I'll start sharing my screen, so I can show what our data actually looked like for these kind of sites. And again, I'm going to touch on the theme of uh, what the free data, or the generic, the widely used data can provide, and then where Gentian comes in with our added detail. So this is an area of one of the sites, and it looks mostly forested. Um, yeah, and with this, you can probably imagine there's probably some different types of forests, but it's not that clear exactly what types of forests might be here, at least when you're at this 10-meter resolution. Um, but then this is the kind of data that Gentian's using. So Gentian's using very high resolution data. Um, and here you can start to see that, yeah, maybe there's some patterns that are actually relevant here. And I'm just going to zoom in one more time. So taking the site and then zooming into this area. And now you can see that actually these are completely different forests, right? Here you have some kind of tree that's planted in these very ordered rows. This is clearly not a natural forest. And then you can even see over here, there's already some clearings, there's some scrubby areas. So essentially, when we get down to the very high resolution level, this is where we can start to actually get to something that's meaningful when it comes to classifying different forest types. So this is where we were providing, this is the level at which we were providing data. So just in terms of how going back to the state of nature metrics, one of the dimensions of that is that for each of the different metrics, you can provide data at different granularity levels. So you can provide what was formerly called low and now it's called preparatory. Then there's medium and then there's high. And depending on the level that you're providing data at, it's a different resolution of data that you can use. And actually, we're using higher resolution data than even what they recommend, than even what's required for the high granularity level. But the other piece for the high granularity level is it requires ground truthing. And ground truthing can be very difficult, especially if you don't own the site or if the site's in a very remote location, like in a tropical forest in Borneo. So another approval that we were able to get working with the Nature Positive Initiative is that using very high resolution data, so data that's 50 centimeter resolution or finer, what you're seeing here, this is 30 centimeters per pixel. So each pixel is like the size of your hand, basically. When you're getting down to that level, this can actually substitute for ground truthing because you can actually see the truth with your eyes, right? With your eyes, you can see that this is some kind of plantation that is going to be of lower value to biodiversity than probably what's the more natural forest to the west here. Now, I don't want to seem like I'm saying that this solves everything or that we can see everything. There's definitely, I'll be the first to admit that there's limitations to what we can do in terms of the remote sensing. So we're not seeing anything that's going on under the canopy. We're not getting down to the species level. We don't know what's happening in the undergrowth. There might be other dynamics at play, but at least if we go back and compare what's going on here to what's going on here, definitely this is a much higher level of detail and a much better way to assess your risk and your impact on the sites.
Makes sense, and also that's why nature tech providers collaborate. Okay, so there's this state of nature metrics pilot going on, which does add this extra layer to what's happening. So what were you actually being asked to produce, and how did that differ from what Raw Energy and LanzaJet needed from the data? I know we touched upon it a little bit, but maybe you want to go into a little bit more detail as well.
Yeah, great. There's a couple aspects I'll touch on. So the first is about the pilots themselves. The pilots were kind of meta pilots, I would say, in that the goal of the pilot was not necessarily to produce the data, it was to evaluate the metrics. That's what NPI was looking for, right? They were looking for feedback on the metrics. And that's exactly what we did. So we in order to give that feedback, of course, you have to go through the metrics themselves. So yeah, we were able to provide that feedback, and then through the consultation, NPI actually was able to make some updates. And I can talk more about what some of those updates were and how they relate to the work that we've been doing.
Yeah.
But in terms of the data need, the other element of this is this difference between risk and reporting. And they are kind of two sides of the same coin, but where the state of nature metrics really are focused is they're really focused on impact and change. So that's about you get your baseline and then you monitor to see what impact the organization has had on nature. What we were doing with Raw and LanzaJet was especially in that before stage, before you start to have that impact, to assess the risk. So it's linked to the impact because you want to see what is the potential impact you might have and what the consequences of that impact might be. But we did do this change as part of the pilot, but we came to recognize in the work, especially with some of the experts at Raw, that it was really important just to have this baselining for the risk at that stage. So seeing what's currently on the site. So rather than impacting the valuable areas, they could actually start by avoiding those areas.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting distinction, and interesting to see how many cases this data can fulfill. To get back to what you just said about the state of nature metrics, and the feedback that you were able to provide, where did this data work well? You get my question.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, so there were some aspects which it was important to have the feedback from the participants because lots of participants struggled. And we were actually able to meet the other participants there. And one aspect was in the habitat data. I mean, they were recommending using some of the providers that I showed before. And some organizations were finding that if we just use these freely available 10-meter maps, it's actually not really meaningful compared to what we have on our site. Then there were aspects going into not just what habitats are there, but the condition of those habitats, where that was data that's basically impossible to get for a lot of places, and it's very difficult to actually define the appropriate condition metrics. So we were able to give some feedback on those aspects, which allowed the Nature Positive Initiative to revise. And I'll just talk about a couple areas where they did revise, and one which I think is a really positive outcome is they've simplified. So they started with these 7 metrics, which related to ecosystem extent, condition. There are a few on species, and then now they've changed it to being very clear. And this is a really good way that they've done it. There's now 8 metrics, but it's a 4x2. So there's the four metrics, which are ecosystem extent, ecosystem condition, species extinction risk, and species population. And for each of these four metrics, this is the key part, they do them at site level now, and then at landscape level. And I think our feedback was really important to helping them to get to there, because this is an important distinction, because the landscape level is important for providing the context, but the site level is important for actually understanding your risk and impact.
Mhm.
Because just because it's around your site doesn't necessarily mean that you have any control over it or any impact on it. But when it's actually on the site itself, that's within your jurisdiction. So that's a key element that came out of the consultation, was the separation between this simplifying site level, landscape level. You need to do both. You need to see what you can do at both these dimensions. The other kind of twist to this is with the granularity levels. So before there were different triggers that meant you had to do certain of the metrics. So for example, with some of the species metrics, you would only have to do the species metric if you might be in if you might have some kind of trigger that means you're in an ecosystem that typically has very valuable species. I mean, even when I'm trying to explain it there, it's quite convoluted. Um, what they've done instead now is they've standardized that these are the 8 metrics, and you're expected to do all 8 of these core metrics. But this is why they've changed that low granularity to preparatory, because they've given you the opportunity for all of the metrics that there's something that can be done. So you could start at that preparatory level and then move onto the medium and high levels. So you could start preparatory, do something on site, do something at the landscape, but you can move further as you go, as you recognize the need for it, to a medium or high granularity, to like a Gentian solution, after you've done that first preparatory. But at least you're already starting by having this common set of metrics that allow us to align on how we're going to do our reporting.
Very clear. Well, on that, I kind of want to zoom back out, and thank you for going into so much detail. But yeah, if someone in the audience is working on a supply chain with similar land use risk, agriculture, for example, forestry, feedstocks, what's the minimum that they should be doing right now to understand their nature exposure?
Yeah, great question. I think it's important to check the different dimensions. Here, it's about making sure that you've got an idea of the different dimensions of nature and trying to gather the information that you have on them. So the 3 dimensions that I would really focus on, the first one fundamentally is habitat or ecosystem. That's especially where Gentian comes in. But even if you're not using Gentian services, then you need to have some information on what's the vegetation on the ground, what are the habitats that are there, what are the communities, um, and yeah, how this underlies the biodiversity on your site. So that's the first one, the ecosystems. Then the second one is trying to understand species in some way. Ideally, if you have a good idea of the habitats on site, so this is what we do with Gentian's data, if you understand the habitats that are on site, you can take the species that might be found in the area and say whether they're likely to be on your site. So if there's species that need a combination of some wetlands and ponds and uh, like ruderal vegetation or something like that, if you have those habitats on site, you might expect that species to be on site. So you want to understand the habitats, then you want to understand the species. And then the third thing is you actually want to understand what are the conservation areas or the designated sites that are around. And if you can get the history of those too, that's helpful. So maybe you're right on the edge of a national park. That can be really relevant. Or maybe in your area, 10 years ago, there were no national parks, no conservation areas, no designations, but now they've been popping up quite frequently. They might be popping up on your site. So understanding these 3 aspects, that at least starts to get you in the right direction: habitats, species, designated sites.
Thank you. That's helpful. Um, So yeah, we're moving on now to the last question. So audience, you can, prepare yourselves to unmute soon and be able to ask anything out loud. I also have a nice set of questions here from what was submitted from the registrants. But to finish this off, Marcus, looking at both where the sustainable aviation fuel sector and nature risk disclosure are heading, what's the thing that isn't yet happening but needs to be?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, and this is really the direction we've gone in with Gentian, to me, it's really all about the site level. And that's why it was really encouraging to see what the state of nature metrics, that they were being explicit about that need for site level data. At least in our experience, what we've been seeing from a lot of the organizations that we work with, they're the first port of call for doing nature reporting, for even for companies in the sustainable aviation fuel sector. What we've seen is they start with IBAT. And for those unfamiliar with IBAT, IBAT is it's a great biodiversity tool that's the four large it's produced by the in partnership with the four largest conservation organizations in the world, like the IUCN. Um, and they provide really valuable data, which includes the protected areas in the world, areas that might become protected areas, an overall maps of species extinction risk. And this is really valuable for giving you context. But that so far has just been the first port of call for organizations, but it's also been their endpoint. So they get that data. That data doesn't change over time, it's static, and that's how they understand their nature. Where we would like to move towards and where we see things are moving towards is getting to the site level. So let's actually understand what's on your site, how you're having an impact on what's on your site, and how you can prevent having a negative impact, and also look for opportunities for improving your site. So actually data around what you can control. And it's great to see that in the state of nature metrics, they are prioritizing that site level data. So I think there's going to be some convergence there for nature risk and reporting in the future. Oh, sorry, Paige. I think you're on mute.
Yes, thank you. I had people talking a little bit too loud outside my window. I was saying, thank you so much, Marcus. That was incredibly articulate and detailed, yet accessible, which is a rare it's a rare balance for you nature tech nerds to strike. So we're going to now open it up to the chat. I see we have one question already. Jose, I'm going to go back to the kind of gallery wall of people in the room. Good to see you here. And yes, Jose, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you, Marcus. Very insightful presentation. And I've been in this business of biodiversity informatics, then translated to ecological informatics, you name it. Right now is we are in nature tech, which is beautiful, and thanks for this community. But Marcus, so you were talking about, for instance, IBAT, right? So I know how IBAT born, and as you mentioned, somebody told me like the tool and apps that you chip into the community, that's how your organization is inside, right? It's a reflection of what is inside of these organizations. So those big NGOs, which what I'm trying to say is like, they've been 20 years building tools with huge headcounts, but they're not delivering, they're not solving the problem. And that's how we have a great opportunity to fill that void and to disrupt, right? With, as you mentioned, site, granular level data with metrics that, of course, impact. So my question is more like, I couldn't understand that, that's my own ignorance, the 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 link between the study case of aviation and what you do, and it is because that airline is registered on the MPI, the positive, the net positive, or is big, and it's a commitment that was compliant or that was voluntary. It was not very clear to me what was the interaction on that regard. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jose. Yeah, thanks for the, yeah, I completely agree with you. Yeah, there's really a void that we're trying to fill here. Yeah, so let me make it very clear what the drivers and the interaction. Let me maybe I'll give what the ideal would be, and then I'll talk more about what our interactions have already been. So the ideal is that an organization like Raw, when they're considering different areas to potentially grow their hybrid tropical switchgrass, their first step should be to use Gentian service, what we call True Atlas, to actually do the nature risk and understand what the risk looks like on their different candidate areas, and find the areas that are low risk to then develop. Then once they're actually developing these areas, now the goal is actually to show evidence of what their impact has been. So this is where we take our baseline and then continue to monitor. And then that monitoring data, so showing how much they've converted, what they've converted it to, what the consequences have been, and prepare that for reporting, and that reporting could be used by Raw, it could be used by LanzaJet, or it could be even used by an investor in LanzaJet to show that they've achieved some carbon reductions, and at the same time, it's had minimal impact, or even in some cases, maybe positive impact on nature. In terms of the precise drivers here, yeah, Raw is under pressure to become a sustainable, to show their sustainability, especially in comparison to other feedstock options. They want to show that their hybrid tropical switchgrass can compete with using something like waste oil products or something like that. And LanzaJet is trying to come up with a methodology for assessing their supply chain.
And that's because it's a feedstock for biofuels?
That's
Okay,
correct.
got it.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah, yeah. So LanzaJet Raw grows it, creates the feedstock, and then LanzaJet turns it into fuel, alcohol to fuel.
All right, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you for your question. Mariana, all yours. And sorry, you're on mute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. So hi everyone, just to present very quickly myself because I didn't find the place to rename me. So I'm an environmental engineer and also a data analytics professional. And I'm trying to move into the nature tech space as a professional. I haven't worked on the sector yet, but I'm really looking forward. So I have two questions for you, Marcus. About the difference in resolution that you showed. So basically, I wanted to understand why is that you are the only one working with that type of resolution. So is it because the other tools that you presented are for free and they don't really want to invest in a higher resolution? And if that is like that, can you explain me how could you integrate the cost of having high resolution into your product? What was the trick there? Because you are accommodating more costs for your business, and if you are able to capture a good margin there, you know, if it is a profitable business plan, like what did you do different that they didn't? And the
Yeah.
second
Maybe
question.
if I can answer it
Sorry.
first, otherwise I'm
Yes, of
afraid I'm
course.
going to forget the elements. But why don't we? Yeah, and then I'm happy to take the second question. But it's a great question, and I'm really glad. I'm sure I'm surrounded by similar nature tech nerds because now we can talk tech. Yeah, and what you suggest is exactly right. Is that yeah, others are using that data because it's free, and for us, we're making a bit of a bet. I mean, I'll be honest. There's trade-offs, right? So we believe that very high resolution imagery is valuable enough that it's worth using. I mean, there's other trade-offs, right? Like the free 10-meter data, that data you can get many, many time points throughout the season, whereas we're reliant on 1, 2, 3 time points. We're not, yeah, because it's data that you do have to pay for, we have to be clever in how we make it work. But at the same time, we're riding the wave of innovation. So now there's more satellites than ever before, and we're constantly impressed that even in remote parts of the world, like we've done some work recently in Gabon and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I was a little bit nervous that maybe there wouldn't be this very high resolution imagery there, but actually within the last couple of years, it's been collected. So there's more and more of this imagery, and we've made it work because we have a combination of really good AI models. So the pace of AI is helping us to keep up with this very high resolution imagery because, of course, if it's very high resolution, it's also very detailed, very large to process, and there's no way you can do it without having some help from AI. So our AI models are keeping up, and I mean, I come from an academic background as well. I think there's just still a sticky misconception that this data is too expensive to work with. But the data has become a lot cheaper, and notably, whereas there used to be a world in which if you wanted any site, you'd have to buy a minimum of 25 square kilometers or a minimum of 100 square kilometers. That's just not the way it works anymore, right? If you want to get a site, you can buy 1 square kilometer of imagery or even smaller than 1 square kilometer of imagery, And that doesn't cost so much. Yet we find that there's this balance between, yes, getting that 1 square kilometer of imagery for your site, it's going to cost you a little bit, but it's going to be hugely valuable compared to having 10 pixels to look at. And then the second question,
Amazing. Thank you. My second question is actually like, if you have a real situation, a real project that you worked on, and perhaps I missed it while you were speaking in the beginning, if you have a real project that you can showcase that there was well, an outcome, so economic outcome, because companies only speak economic language, right? So if there was an economic outcome of using these high granularity data, you know, if, for example, by using Gentian data sets or your software, I didn't actually know your company, so I don't know if I'm referring correctly, but is there an example that shows that a company did use your granularity, and because of that, they were able to spot like deforestation or water courses, I don't know, and they could reduce their impact, you know, like a project that shows that using high granularity data brings positive impact for the company, or avoids getting fines, or avoids, degrading land that, as you said, like, since yesterday it's now a national park. Yeah. Do you have some?
Completely understood. I have a good example here. So the example I'll give, it's work that a large pharmaceutical company came to us, and essentially they were testing us. And what they did is they gave us a site to do a nature risk assessment on using our very high resolution data. And this was a site that they had actually already recently started to build on, but they wanted to see what our nature risk would have picked up. And they ended up building on this site anyways, even though there was a protected bird on that site. But because they had already gone so far down the route of planning and preparation and early design, they, despite what their biodiversity team and what their stakeholders would have liked, there was no turning back for them at that stage. So what they were testing is, would we have picked up that there was likely this bird on that site? And so through our assessment, we did our habitats, so very high resolution habitats, understanding that this is a site with a combination of some trees on it, some wetland area, and we flagged up that there was one very likely bird that was in close proximity to the site that would have made this site a high nature risk. So in terms of the exact economic value, I'm not sure what that would have been, but definitely if they would have screened this site with our tool against a few other sites, this site would have come to the bottom of the priority for what they would build on, and they would have likely built on something else and avoided this headache that they end up dealing with.
Okay, thank you. I'm just curious, like, I'm not completely aware of what are the costs of moving forward with a building that will affect the habitat of that bird. So what kind of impacts does a company suffer in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in this case, it can be reputation, but definitely there's other drivers, and we're seeing hundreds of new biodiversity regulations coming into play every year. We're seeing especially that now there's more of a push to, okay, if you have an impact, you have to mitigate that. So there's some legislation in France around this. I forget exactly the name, but basically if you have a certain level of impact, you have to mitigate that. So where this goes is that, okay, you still might be able to build on that site, but it's going to cause delays and it's going to cost you to mitigate somewhere else. And I think there have been studies done that like every week of delay in the development sector costs thousands of dollars. I don't know the exact number, but it is significant.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
And thank you for those great questions, Mariana. I'll let other people either manifest themselves. Oh, we've got Esther, who's asking a question in the chat because I think she's on a train. Would you like to read out loud, Marcus? And
Sure, yeah. So the question is about harvesting for SAF on degraded or forest area, and saying that, yeah, I suggested that's better than destroying intact nature. But does our approach take into account the opportunity for that plot to actually be restored to full nature? Yeah, especially if it reconnects pristine nature and the trade-off for harvest versus natural habitat. Yeah, no problem. It's very clear, the question. Thank you. Yeah, I think, yeah, of course, there's always going to be opportunity costs, and there's a few really good points that you bring up here. I mean, one element of this is that, yeah, taking a degrader to forested area, converting that to, yeah, you can do something like convert it to agriculture, and in this case, converting to a switchgrass, which has its own benefits, while also actually doing some restoration action. So this is what we see a lot of companies want to do. So even back to the example of data centers, yes, they create a data center on site, but along with that data center, they're putting a green roof on the data center, and they're creating ponds, and they're planting trees, and they're creating a wildflower meadow. And so, yeah, when you select a site, um, the site presents itself with risk, but it also presents opportunity, right? Where there's poor biodiversity sites, in transforming them, you can actually also, on top of that, layer the opportunity for improving them. Then the other piece of this is the reconnection piece, and I think that's really important. So that's one of the things that we really prioritize at Gentian, is also providing a map of connectivity. So that's what's often lost by biodiversity metrics, is it's not just about what's on the site itself. I mean, understand what's on the site is crucial to this, but also how that site connects to the wider landscape. So for example, with the work that we did with the state of nature metrics and Raw and LanzaJet, one of the indicators, one of the four criteria, one of the four metric types is condition and landscape condition. So there's site condition and then there's landscape condition. Landscape condition, the metric for that is actually all about connectivity. So this is something that we're already doing. So basically, if you're trying to reconnect pristine nature, let's say they convert some of that area to a tropical switchgrass, but then they still create also a corridor where they're creating some reforestation or some kind of, yeah, diverse woodland. So they can do both. And then what they're recreating is actually providing that corridor to enhance connectivity while they're still achieving their aims with the agriculture.
Thank you, Marcus. And I hope that answers your question, Esther. Yes, very clear, perfect. We have about 7 minutes left, and we had some great questions. Marcus, I wonder if you had any favorite questions from the ones submitted at the beginning. I see one from Tori. Tori, you're in the room. Do you remember the question that you asked? And can we bring it up now? Probably taking you completely off guard.
If there's only one Tori on the call, I'm definitely one Tori.
Absolutely,
if it's my question, please, I have no recollection what it was. Please go ahead and ask it.
It was for the people making decisions about where to grow feedstock. What are the biggest barriers to adoption and systemic integration, such as that the right data gets used at the right time in the right way?
God, that's a great question. I'm so glad I asked it. Please answer it.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, there's a lot of drivers and incentives, and what we find, and this is what we say, that the problem isn't desire, the problem is visibility. So for us, the biggest barrier still is the access, and to be honest, the affordable access to high quality site level data. And that's what we're trying to do at Gentian, especially. Because there's often, let's say, some backlash against organizations saying, they don't care about nature, or nobody's trying to do anything, or there's indifference. And okay, in a lot of cases, I'm sure it's true. But also in a lot of cases, I think organizations really do want to devote time, resources, energy. They want to do the right thing for nature. But how can they if they have no idea what's there? If they have no idea, if they don't have the data to be able to make these decisions to have the right impact? So from our perspective, still it's a lot about visibility with data, and especially visibility at the site level. Because like we saw, I mean, if you were just using some of the freely available data sources, they would say that in Borneo, everything is the same. You develop in one place, you develop in another place. they're going to be the same impact because it's all part of a tropical forest environment. But what we can see when we zoom into the site level is that actually you could be deforesting pristine 1,000-year-old tropical forest, or there's areas that are already cleared. And we really want to prioritize those areas that are cleared, and we want to give you the data to be able to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, Marcus, I'll let you either choose the last one or
Oh, I'm not sure if I've got it queued up, but
oh, let's see. Yeah, it's at the very bottom of the document. We've
yeah,
got
yeah. If someone has a
also that.
yeah, if someone has another question that comes up, feel free. But
Where did you source the satellite imagery?
sure, yeah, I can answer that, and then the quickly, and then maybe we can even go to one of the other questions. Yeah, we're using very high resolution imagery from commercial providers, so Airbus and well, formerly Maxar, now Vantor constellations. So yeah, we have licenses to use their data. Okay, maybe I'll go for yes.
Sorry, Marcus, but I was given this question that our colleague just did. Sorry, I didn't. Jose did. So, are you you have license to use data that is only connected to aviation companies or not? Because you said Airbus, but the other reference I didn't get.
Sorry. I guess Airbus has different arms. So of course, Airbus itself is also an aviation company, but they also produce satellite, or they also have their satellite constellations. So those satellite constellations include the Pleiades satellites, so Pleiades Neo. So yeah, it's that the satellites we use actually has nothing to do with the aviation side of things. It's just these providers of very high resolution commercial imagery, and the leading providers. There are quite a few, but especially two of the big ones are Airbus and Maxar Vantor.
Okay.
Yes. Um, yeah, maybe I'll read this one off. Yeah, what would it take to create a certification or market mechanism that rewards feedstocks grown in ways that demonstrably improve ecosystem health rather than simply minimizing impacts? Yeah, I mean, I think there's different routes towards a market mechanism. I mean, now this is definitely I'm going beyond thinking I'm going beyond things we're doing at Gentian, but just thinking out loud a little bit. Um, yeah, I mean the what definitely wants to be avoided is some of the pitfalls that have befallen the carbon credit space, right? Which is that yeah, a lot of the carbon credits in recent years have been found to be either fraudulent or meaningless. So I think it's really important that when it comes to SAF, or frankly anyone that's doing nature reporting, that there's some fidelity behind it. But yeah, I think some of the keys are going to be having certifications and standards with this evidence piece behind it. So yeah, certifications that are from relevant, from respected bodies, and then having uh, platforms and platforms and interfaces where this can actually be checked. So rather than just a company disclosing this is what we did, this is what our governance was, actually being able to show this is the evidence on the table, this is what's part of our supply chain, and within the supply chain we can actually give you these are the actual maps, these are the receipts for how these sites have had impacts or how these sites have had change.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Jose, I see that
Yeah,
you had a question,
sorry.
but we don't have enough time to bring it
Okay,
up.
that's fine. That's fine. It's fine. It's okay. Thank you.
We'll share the emails. Yeah, thank you everyone so much for being here. Thank you, Marcus. And with that, I'll just kind of clap in the air and give you all a good Wednesday afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are.